Gilbert Arenas just pulled off the coldest heist in modern sports media, and almost nobody watching the funeral even noticed the getaway car. The entire internet spent the last 72 hours screaming that Gilbert Arenas got fired, buried, embarrassed, blown out of the water by a company with lawyers who negotiate for a living. Wrong. Dead wrong. Gilbert Arenas didn't get fired. Gilbert Arenas cashed the check, kept the crown, walked out the front door with the audience tucked under one arm and the brand tucked under the other, and left Underdog holding an empty studio with a rebranded logo on the wall. That is not a downfall. That is a robbery in broad daylight, dressed up as a breakup. And there is one document, one signature, one single clause buried in a contract from October of 2025 that made every single thing you are about to hear inevitable. Nobody is telling you about that clause. Everybody is fixated on the drama, on the firings, on the little dog that got cut, on Nick Young laughing on Instagram Live. Meanwhile, the actual weapon Gilbert Arenas used to blow this whole thing up has been sitting on a shelf in plain sight for over a year. Stay locked in, because by the time this video ends, Gilbert Arenas is going to look less like a guy who got booted from his own show and more like a chess grandmaster who set the board up 18 months before the first pawn even moved. Now let me back this up, because to understand the size of what just happened, you have to understand what Gils Arena actually was before the smoke started rising. This wasn't some little side hustle in a garage. This wasn't Gilbert Arenas mumbling into a webcam. Gils Arena was the #1 basketball show on YouTube, period, full stop, no asterisk. 500 million views. 275,000 people locked in for every single episode. The 5th biggest daily sports show in the entire United States of America, chasing down ESPN's First Take, a show with a full corporate war chest, a decade of institutional muscle, and Stephen A. Smith's contract worth more than the GDP of a small island. First Take pulls around 496,000 daily views. Gils Arena, a group of retired hoopers in a basement, was breathing down its neck. That does not happen. That is a statistical impossibility until Gilbert Arenas made it happen. The only comparable eruption in modern sports media is what Pat McAfee did in the NFL lane, and Gilbert Arenas basically built the basketball version of that from scratch in less than 3 years. But to really taste how insane this is, you need to know who Gilbert Arenas actually is. Because if you are young and only know Gilbert Arenas as the guy on the couch yelling at Kenyon Martin, Gilbert Arenas is missing chapters of history that make this whole story hit different. The nickname is Agent Zero. That nickname was not a compliment. That nickname came from the fact that 0 teams thought Gilbert Arenas was first-round material. Gilbert Arenas slid all the way down to the 31st pick in the 2001 NBA draft, the second round, disrespected by an entire league. And Gilbert Arenas played the next decade with a boulder for a shoulder chip. Career average, 20.7 points a night. 3 All-Star teams. In the 2005-2006 season, Gilbert Arenas averaged 29.3 points per game. Gilbert Arenas once dropped 60 on Kobe Bryant, 60 on Prime Mamba. Gilbert Arenas was hitting logo game winners years before Stephen Curry made that a personality trait. And then, in the most poetic irony you will ever hear, Gilbert Arenas lost the entire thing over a card game. 2009, a gambling dispute on a team plane with Javers Crittenden spiraled so far off the rails that Gilbert Arenas brought guns into the Wizards locker room. Gilbert Arenas got a season-long suspension. Gilbert Arenas plead guilty to a felony. Adidas dropped Gilbert Arenas. Career #1, gone. Remember that word, gambling. Circle it. Underline it. Tattoo it on your brain. That word is about to come back at the end of this video and blow the roof off the whole story. Fast forward. Gilbert Arenas rebuilds an entire second life. Starts a podcast in 2018 called No Chill Gil. Grinds. Then in 2023, Gilbert Arenas partners with a fantasy company nobody outside gambling Twitter had heard of, and Gils Arena is born in a literal basement setup. A few retired hoopers. 0 filter. And this is where the alchemy happens, because the show did not blow up because of hot takes. There are 10,000 hot take accounts on Twitter, and none of them are pulling 275,000 daily viewers. Gils Arena blew up because of chemistry, and chemistry is the one ingredient no algorithm on earth can manufacture. You had Josiah Johnson running point as host and executive producer, the glue guy, the traffic cop keeping 5 personalities from setting the studio on fire. Kenyon Martin, former #1 overall pick, all-star, and a human volcano who could go from calm to fully crashing out in about 3 seconds flat. Nick Young, Swaggy P himself, NBA champion, walking punchline machine. A man who can absorb a roast and reflect it back at triple the wattage. Rashad McCants, national champion at North Carolina, the show's designated grenade, always ready to detonate. Brandon Jennings, Mr. Basketball, USA, bringing that street credibility. Lexi Brown adding WNBA weight, and for a stretch, a literal Hall of Famer in Cheryl Swoops. That is not a cast. That is an ensemble film. And you cannot audition for that. You cannot manufacture that. You cannot Excel spreadsheet your way into that. Now, enter Underdog. Founded in 2020, a fantasy and betting operation that in 5 short years turned into one of the fastest growing sports companies in America, reportedly on pace for around $500 million in yearly revenue. But Underdog never wanted to be just a betting app. Underdog wanted a media empire, a full network. Its own version of ESPN built by ex-players, talking directly to fans, without a suit, filtering the language. Underdog stack shows. Steve Smith. Jay Gruden. Even Bill Belichick ran a brief fantasy football operation on the platform. But nothing, and I mean nothing, hit like Gils Arena. Gils Arena was the crown jewel. Gils Arena was the proof of concept that new media, athlete-owned, athlete-driven, could stand toe-to-toe with a four-letter network. Gils Arena was the flagship. So when you hear Gilbert Arenas and Underdog are splitting, understand exactly what is on the table. This is not some throwaway podcast getting shelved. This is Underdog losing the single most valuable brick in an empire Underdog spent years and millions of dollars building. Now here is the trapdoor. In October of 2025, Gilbert Arenas sold 50% of Gils Arena to Underdog. 50%. Half. And, on the surface, that looks like Gilbert Arenas cashing out, giving up control, handing over the keys. Everybody, at the time, made that read. Everybody was wrong. Gilbert Arenas explained the play directly. Gilbert Arenas said the 50-50 was about learning the operation, learning how to run a daily show, learning the machine. A daily show is brutal. Editors, producers, a studio, researchers making sure the facts are straight, studio staff, overhead. Gilbert Arenas did not want to eat that entire cost pile alone. So Gilbert Arenas handed Underdog half the company and let Underdog run the plumbing. And in the process, the show got trimmed from 4 days a week down to 2. But here is the clause that ends this story before it even starts. Gilbert Arenas held on to the name. Gilbert Arenas held on to the format. Gilbert Arenas held on to the IP. Underdog bought a channel. Underdog rented a show. Underdog never owned Gilbert Arenas. That distinction is the whole ball game. Underdog thought Underdog bought a building. Underdog actually bought a lease. August 2025, Underdog rolls in Skip Bayless to headline a football spin-off called The Arena Gridiron. Skip Bayless, the king of the hot take era, freshly cut loose by Fox Sports in 2024 after 8 years and a canceled Undisputed. On paper, the pairing cooked. When the football version launched, viewership did not dip. Viewership jumped 93% in month 1. 23 million views in September. Second biggest sports show on all of YouTube, behind only Pat McAfee. So the popular internet talking point that Skip Bayless killed Gils Arena is factually, mathematically, completely wrong. Skip Bayless nearly doubled the numbers. But numbers were not the problem. The problem was a power struggle inside the building. Because Skip Bayless was not brought in as a co-host. Skip Bayless was brought in as a possible replacement. And Gilbert Arenas saw the movement in the shadows before anybody else did. May of 2026, Gilbert Arenas took a vacation. Not a random beach trip. A vacation during the NBA Conference Finals, the single hottest window in the basketball calendar. And when the show went live, guess whose chair Skip Bayless was sitting in? Skip Bayless, hosting a show with Gilbert Arenas' name on the wall. And this was surgical, because Gilbert Arenas' contract was scheduled to expire right around June 30th, which is not a coincidence. June 30th is when NBA free agency officially opens. That is the biggest news window of the year. Whoever booked that contract expiration on that exact date was not playing chess. Whoever booked that expiration was playing Gilbert Arenas, or trying to. Gilbert Arenas even said out loud, on stream, that if the message was becoming that the show is better without Gilbert Arenas, then Gilbert Arenas was hearing the message loud and clear. Gilbert Arenas compared the phase-out to what happens in an NBA locker room when the media starts writing that the team is better without a player. The player reads it. The player believes it. The player starts acting like it. Gilbert Arenas was telling everybody in plain daylight on camera that Gilbert Arenas was being pushed out of Gilbert Arenas' own show. And nobody at Underdog stopped the train. Late June, Gilbert Arenas went on the Stephen A. Smith show and dropped the guillotine. Gilbert Arenas said, in about 6 days, Gilbert Arenas would 100% own the name Gils Arena. Gilbert Arenas said the rest of the cast was locked into Underdog contracts through September, meaning Gilbert Arenas could not legally recruit, could not poach, could not even open the conversation. Gilbert Arenas said Gilbert Arenas was launching a brand new show in August, with a fresh lineup, unless the existing cast just flat out quit and walked. Then came the goodbye episode. Josiah Johnson, the co-host, the man who built Gils Arena shoulder to shoulder with Gilbert Arenas from day one, said goodbye live on air, thanking the crew, thanking the fans, choking it back. If you know the backstory, that goodbye was not just a sign off. That goodbye was a funeral for the original ensemble. The Gils Arena that broke the internet for 2 straight years was officially dead. And that dumps us straight into the last 72 hours of chaos. Because right after the goodbye, the internet detonated over one claim, and one claim only. Underdog fired everybody. Not just fired the cast. Fired the entire crew. Fired the staff. Fired. And this part is real. The little dog that Brandon Jennings used to bring to set. Nick Young hopped on Instagram Live and said the whole cast got cut. Ballast Life reposted and pulled almost 1 million views inside a day. Swaggy P was joking on air that Underdog was cutting anybody who wore Underdog gear to work. But the ugliest cut of all was not Gilbert Arenas versus Underdog. The ugliest cut was Gilbert Arenas versus Gilbert Arenas' own soldiers. Because before Nick Young ever went on IG, one moment cracked the locker room straight down the middle. June. Rashad McCants, an original cast member, a player Gilbert Arenas personally handed a seat at the table, went on air and thanked Underdog. Thanked the company. Wore the company across Rashad McCants' chest head to toe. And Gilbert Arenas was sitting right there, reacting in real time, watching one of Gilbert Arenas' own soldiers stand up and salute the flag of the people trying to phase Gilbert Arenas out. The whole thing played like a mob movie. That scene where Fredo blows the family and the boss realizes it in real time. That was the energy. And Nick Young was already roasting Rashad McCants on set, calling Rashad McCants a glazer, using words that turned into memes within the hour. So when the fired everybody moment hit days later, the twist was Shakespearean. Rashad McCants sided with the company. Rashad McCants wore the company across Rashad McCants' chest. Rashad McCants thanked the company on live television. And the company said, thanks for the loyalty, and cut Rashad McCants anyway. If loyalty had a receipt, that receipt got shredded in front of a live studio audience. And there is one detail buried underneath the Rashad McCants moment that nobody is stopping to think about. And it is the detail that tells you why Gilbert Arenas is walking out untouched. Loyalty in new media is not a feeling. Loyalty in new media is a contract. Loyalty in new media is equity. Gilbert Arenas understood that from day one. Rashad McCants thanked the company because Rashad McCants was reading the contract, not the room. And that is the exact instinct that gets creators cooked in the corporate era. The people who sign the biggest deals, the flashiest deals, the deals with the neon marketing rollout, are almost always the same people who wake up 2 years later with a canceled show, a locked-out social media handle, and a non-compete keeping them from working for 6 months. Rashad McCants is about to live that story in real time on national streaming platforms. Nick Young figured it out. Josiah Johnson figured it out. Kenyon Martin figured it out. Every single one of them is riding shotgun with Gilbert Arenas because every single one of them can read the geometry of the exits. The exits at Underdog are one-way doors. The exit Gilbert Arenas built points directly back to the top of the mountain. Now, media insider Marcellus Wiley did the actual mechanical breakdown of where everybody ends up when the smoke clears. Marcellus Wiley explained that Gilbert Arenas is currently handcuffed by non-compete language and cooling off periods baked into the old contracts, which is a fancy legal way of saying Gilbert Arenas legally cannot even call the old cast until September. Marcellus Wiley's read was that Kenyon Martin and Josiah Johnson are riding out with Gilbert Arenas, but Rashad McCants is staying at Underdog and possibly getting a solo show teaming with Skip Bayless of all people. Which, if that lands, would mean Rashad McCants is sliding into the exact same chair Underdog used to elbow Gilbert Arenas out of the room. If you write that in a movie script, the studio sends the script back for being too on the nose. And by the way, Rashad McCants and loyalty have never lived in the same zip code. This is a man who won a national championship at North Carolina in 2005, went 14th overall in the draft, and has spent the years since publicly torching old Tar Heel teammates, comparing playing for the University of North Carolina to being in prison. Rashad McCants becoming the fault line in the Gilbert Arenas divorce is basically the most on-brand thing that could have possibly happened. It writes itself. But here is the piece the entire internet keeps missing. Gilbert Arenas already won. Everybody is out here typing obituaries, and Gilbert Arenas is sitting on the getaway car with the engine already running. Because remember the contract, the name, the IP, the format. Gilbert Arenas kept all three. And back in May of 2026, Gilbert Arenas posted a video from a brand new personal studio, pointed at the wall, and said, "This channel says Gils Arena." Gilbert Arenas was building the parachute a year before jumping. And days before the Fired Everybody circus even lit up, Gilbert Arenas posted the second dagger. New IG page. Gils Arena Season 5. Brand new neon studio. Gilbert Arenas is not sitting at home unemployed and heartbroken. Gilbert Arenas is relaunching the exact same show under the exact same name Gilbert Arenas made famous in Gilbert Arenas' own building. And this time Gilbert Arenas owns 100% of every single frame. Underdog is left standing in the wreckage, holding a rebranded channel now called The Arena, a football show, a Skip Bayless contract, and zero brand equity in the flagship. Underdog spent 2 years and stacks of cash building the biggest basketball show in America and walked away with an empty building. That is not a divorce. That is a demolition. Look at the Brett Cooper precedent to see the future. Daily Wire took Brett Cooper off the Brett Cooper Show and tried to slot a Brett Cooper copy into the seat. Brett Cooper left, launched a fresh channel, and clawed back 1.5 million subscribers in about 6 months. The Daily Wire operation around that lane collapsed. Because here is the media law Gilbert Arenas understood before the suits did. A channel is a container. The face is the product. Take the face out, the container leaks. And now the closing twist, the poetic loop, the thing that makes this whole story feel scripted by the universe itself. Remember the word gambling. The word that ended Gilbert Arenas' first career on a team plane playing cards with Javaris Crittenton. Gilbert Arenas rebuilt Gilbert Arenas' second life shoulder to shoulder with a sports gambling company. And in July of 2025, Gilbert Arenas got arrested and indicted on federal charges connected to allegedly running illegal high-stakes poker games out of Gilbert Arenas' own mansion. Gambling ended career 1. Gambling is hovering directly over career 2. That is not a coincidence. That is a theme. That is the through line of Gilbert Arenas' entire life stamped in bold letters. And somehow, in the middle of that legal fire, Gilbert Arenas still outmaneuvered a company that literally negotiates contracts for a living. Here is the honest verdict. Season 5 might smash. Season 5 might flop. Nobody knows if Gilbert Arenas can bottle lightning twice, because the magic of Gils Arena was never just Gilbert Arenas alone. The magic was that room, that ensemble, Kenya Martin crashing out, Swaggy P dying laughing, Rashad McCants throwing a grenade every 15 minutes. Owning Gils Arena and rebuilding Gils Arena are two different sports. But the receipt is already written. Gilbert Arenas handed the entire creator economy a blueprint. Take the partnership. Take the money. Let the label run the plumbing. But never, ever, ever sign away the name. Because the second the name is gone, the person is just talent. And talent gets replaced on a Tuesday. Gilbert Arenas made sure Gilbert Arenas is never replaceable. And Underdog fumbled the single most valuable asset Underdog ever had. Because the truly wild part of this entire saga is that Gilbert Arenas beat Underdog at Underdog's own sport before the game even tipped off. Underdog builds algorithms that predict outcomes. Underdog sells the science of prediction. And Gilbert Arenas outplayed the app. Gilbert Arenas priced in every move Underdog was going to make 18 months before Underdog made it. Let me know in the comments who you think comes out on top when Season 5 drops in August, because this story is not over. This story is about to get louder.